good? Did you say it?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm Sharon Franklin, and I'm speaking this morning just to give you an update on what's happening at the border in Tijuana. I can't talk about any other border crossings, but I've spent the last 3 years for significant periods of time there, so I know what it's like for asylum seekers. When we started 3 years ago, when I began to be at the border, and what it's like now. And I wanted to start with this photograph of, just because this is how the world should be. This is the beach in Tijuana, it's Playas. And looks so beautiful and serene like oceans often do. Okay. But this is the border wall right at the beach. And this really ugly wall was constructed, I'm not really sure how many years ago. The writing on the wall are the names of deported veterans, U.S. veterans. And a lot of them now have been updated to have death dates because they died before they were able to cross back into the United States. So not only did the United States build this wall that hits the ocean, but they constructed it then and added to it so it goes really way out into the ocean. So people have tried to swim around it, which seems like it might be really easy to do, but you drown. And there are things under the water that make it really, really treacherous and difficult. So in many parts of the border, when you go from the city of Tijuana and drive to Playas, you'll see 3 levels of walls like this. Like one wall isn't enough. There's just like parallel ones. So it's just like really disrupted a quite beautiful landscape. Okay. This is Javier, and he became my partner. Who knew? When I went to the border for the first time, it was February of 2019. And the first caravan of people coming from Latin America, primarily Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, had arrived in that previous November. And were living in really terrible conditions. And I wanted to know what was going on and how I could help. So I went across the border that first time, and the second day I met Javier. And he and I began to talk. We would walk over to El Chaparral, and you'll hear me mention that word. It's like the border crossing. It's a big plaza where if you were crossing the border into the United States, a taxi might let you off. It would drive in a little turnaround and let you off, and then you would walk across the border, and it's where people meet people coming from the United States into Tijuana. So it's like it was a gathering place, but it's the place where asylum seekers all had to come at that time and get a number, because it was the only way that Mexico could deal with big numbers of people all wanting to cross at once. So they would give each person a number. And the first time I saw a number, I nearly fainted. It was on a little piece of yellow paper the size of my thumbnail. It had a 4-digit number written on it. And imagine you have to save this little piece of paper and guard it with your life, because when your number's called, then that's when you can cross the border, which at that time was about at least 4 months. So Javier and I would walk over to El Chaparral 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, and we began to see women and children often huddled behind these big, colorful Mexico letters right at El Chaparral, prepared to sleep on the ground with their children overnight, because they would have come to the border expecting, with their number in hand, expecting that their number would be called. So imagine you've traveled with 2 or 3 little children, you arrive at the border from wherever you're staying, in a shelter with a relative outside of town. You get there 5, 6 in the morning, and you're 3 numbers away, but they only call 1 number that day. And you don't have the money or the time or the resources to get anywhere else or to get back to where you were staying. And so we would find them crying often, huddled behind these letters, prepared to sleep. So Javier and I at that time would either get a hotel for them. If we couldn't find a shelter, we would look for a shelter first. If the shelters were full, we would pay for a hotel. And then we started talking, and we thought, maybe we could find a house and open up an emergency shelter where people just like this, particularly women and children, could stay for 1 or 2 nights until their number is called. So, yes, you can advance it. This is a family. This is like one little girl, and she and her sister and her mom we found them prepared to sleep on the ground. I just think that's like the most endearing little picture of her. And so we looked for a month, walking the streets of Tijuana. It's not like there are want ads or real estate people. You just walk up and down the streets until you want to cry. That was me. And finally, you see a for rent sign in a window. And after nearly a month of looking, we saw this for rent sign for half of a duplex that was about a half a block from El Chaparral. It was perfect. We stood in the street, called the number. The landlord came out of the part of the duplex, the other part of the duplex, and showed us. And I had brought enough money from donations with me to pay first and last month's rent, buy a refrigerator, and buy bunk beds. And we opened La Casa de Paso, which means the house of passing through. It looks like quite a nice place. Actually, it was just horrible inside. We spent weeks just cleaning and painting and plastering and doing all kind of things. Okay, there are bunk beds. But the really interesting part, we have learned so many things, was that a lot of families that would come and stay didn't want to sleep upstairs in the bunk beds. And I think they had been through so much trauma and so much fear that they just want to be near a door. And so we got a couple mattresses and we would put down on the floor. And often when we would come home, this is how we would see. I mean, the man sleeping on the floor in the corner. They're kind of half on beds, half off beds. One time we walked in, there was a family of 7. They were just literally scattered all over the floor of the living room. Okay. Basically, our house is a preschool. It looks like a preschool. Now, this was in the beginning, so we didn't have very many books and toys and games. We accumulated a lot more, but this is it's kind of what it's like. And we have a futon couch, because everything else in the house we just scrounged. Okay, so this is, kind of like an ordinary day of some kids that were going to be there either for a while. Their parents would cook a meal or charge their phones or just rest, or these might have been kids that were spending the night. And often it looks like this, which makes me happy I'm not a preschool teacher. But anyway, if there are enough kids in the house, it's just a big mess, and then all the parents and kids help put everything back again. So that's how the casa was running. So I just include that picture because it's just so sweet. And it reminds me that, the older children, whether they're siblings or not, are so patient and kind and sweet and caring for the littles. I've seen it over and over again. Okay. So this is a picture of El Chaparral as it was then. People are just standing around waiting for the powers that be to come out and call however many numbers or no numbers that particular day. It's cold, and people would come at like 5 in the morning and start waiting. A lot of them would come from long enough distance they wouldn't have breakfast. And so their kids are there. Okay. This little girl was another, it's kind of a little out of order, but we met her and her mom and her sister walking downtown in Tijuana one day, and she just came running up to give Javier a big kiss, and I love that picture, so I had to include it. Okay, so she's waiting with her parents, just looking at the phone, and kids didn't have much to do. They would play, okay, you can advance. Some of them just made up little games. And so finally, we started bringing pieces of paper and crayons. So we just put it down, dump some crayons on the pavement, and kids would start doing art. And some of us would get down on the ground and color with the kids, which Javier loved to do. This we finally got a blue tarp, so sometimes there would be as many as 14 or 15 kids just shoulder to shoulder around this coloring. And I started putting the art up. We called it our La Galleria. So we would put art up on the border fence right there every day, and kids would tell me where they wanted their picture to be, and they would want their parents to take a picture on their phone with it or hold their picture. And so it became a really big deal, and it would stay up, and then till somebody for the city would rip everything down, then we'd just start over the next day with more pictures. Okay. It's just an idea of, sometimes we would bring large paper and they would do murals, and this is where you could see how well the kids played together. This little girl with the red bow, was starting to do stuff, and then a couple of other kids, we had longer pieces of paper someday, and they would just keep adding to it, but they would kind of build on what she was doing without a word being said. And then you'd have little kids, like 2-year-olds, coming and just starting to almost, do 2-year-old coloring on it. They wouldn't get mad. And what she started doing that I thought was just brilliant is that she started on a piece of paper and would do outlines of things for them to color. This is the start of a neighborhood. I have many more drawings of this on my phone, but these kids this group of boys did whole neighborhoods. They had house numbers and ponds and trees with swings and vegetable gardens and birds, and it was Christmas, so they had a Christmas tree, and I told this one little boy that I would love to live in his neighborhood. So he drew me into the picture and put a present and gave me a present. It wasn't all just lovely and sweet at El Chaparral. We were also passing out indelible markers so people could write the names and phone numbers of relatives on their children's arms, so if they were separated in crossing the border, they would have a way of reuniting them. And we were doing this without trying to just scare parents beyond belief. It was a delicate balance. Okay. So then you fast forward past COVID. The border is closed now, and there has been no way for people basically to cross for months. I went back after 14 months in March, and people still weren't crossing, and they still aren't crossing. And then one day, somebody who calls himself a preacher, and I use air quotes, showed up at the border with 4 pop tents and told everybody if they prayed real hard with him and that God would open the gates in the night and they would all be able to cross if they believed. So you had about 4 people pitching pop tents, and soon you had like a whole lot of tents there. Keep going. And this is El Chaparral now. There have been as many as 3,000 people camped in this one tiny space, just wall to wall, with sometimes 2 families sleeping in one pop tent. And there are probably 8 porta potties for 2,000 people, 2 just makeshift showers. And so even during COVID, when we couldn't have people staying at the house, plus no one was crossing the border, so no one would be short-term, Javier was bringing people back. He called it running showers. And I think the next picture shows, well, that's what's happening now. So now they've moved some people out that were just oozing out in the peripheries, even kind of almost onto our street. Oh, if you back up, I can show you. Well, it's really hard to see, but if you look toward the left side of the picture and you go down a little ways and you see kind of an orange roof, and just a little past that, if it were zoomed in, you would see our duplex. That's how close we are to El Chaparral. But anyway, things were moving more and more towards the streets, so they moved some people out, squished people together, put up a chain link fence now around the whole periphery with one exit and entrance, and they went to each tent. There were like 100 police that showed up maybe 2 weeks ago. Went to each tent, asked for people's name. I'm scared what they're doing with this information, but their name, their country of origin, and gave each tent a number and gave people a pass. And so the only way that they get in and out now of that is to show a pass. And they have police at the entrance with drug dogs. And so it's possibly a little safer because what has happened in the last 6 or 8 months is that the cartel has totally taken over El Chaparral, because you have a vulnerable group of people who are desperate to feed their families and exist. So it's possibly made things a little safer, but I'm not convinced of that. This is a line of people who are just getting ready to show their passes just to get into their pop tent. And this was taken just a few days ago. Javier was walking around giving out masks with another woman that we know, kind of inside. Oh, they've cut off all the electricity now. So about 3 days ago, they took out. One of the things that the cartel did is, if you pay us so much money, we can wire electricity to your tent. You can have a fan, you can have a TV, you could have a microwave. And so now all the electricity has been shut off and the water has been shut off. So keep going. I include this, it's back before there were a huge number of people, and back before it got so dangerous for volunteers that most people didn't walk into where all the tents were. There was a little activity that somebody had devised for parents and children, and they were invited to make a house together, which just absolutely kind of broke your heart to see them. And these little kids were giving Javier and I a little tour of the houses that parents and kids made together, and they were just talking about how much they loved these houses and what was inside of them and what they included. Okay. This is a picture. Javier is not a photographer, but this is a picture that really tells you what it's like when he brings groups of people just to take showers at the house. This is one group. And they'll just take turns taking showers and cooking meals and just having a little respite. And he might do 2 or 3 groups like this in a day. So that's the situation at the border right now. I don't know when people are going to be able to cross again. I was writing, when I was down there several months ago, I was writing humanitarian parole visas for families and sending them through the ACLU. And that was one way that I probably got 12 families across that had been waiting for a long time. But I want to tell you, a lot of people don't know what it's like for asylees once they enter the United States. They're asylees. So that's the term. What it's like for them, and it really varies, but it's very much different from coming in as a refugee. These 2 women, you could make a TV movie about. They're from Cuba. They met on the road, traveling. It took them walking. I don't know where they hit in terms of, it could have even been someplace in South America to start walking at, but it took 7 months. And in the course of the 7 months, they were gang raped. They were kidnapped twice and escaped. They had to walk through the Panamanian jungle and lost each other and found each other 4 days later, and finally made it to Tijuana. And then were waiting. And these 2 women, I thought maybe they were partners, but they were just friends. They just met. They didn't even know each other in Cuba. They just met on the road and decided to travel together. So they crossed, and I keep in touch with many of these families, and they're in Florida. But their situation is such that one of them is living with an aunt, one of them is living with a friend. Asylees cannot legally work. So when you come to this country, no matter how much you want to work, and there are things that you could do, you are not allowed to work. You could be deported immediately if you are caught working. So this means that you really have to exist on air or on family or the kindness of strangers, because you're not eligible for benefits, a lot of the benefits that refugees are able to have. And it's still hard for refugees, so I'm not saying anything about that. I'm just saying it's even more dire for asylees. So these 2 women are able to, work with friends, and there's one person in each of those households for somebody to help. So they're doing okay. Next slide. This family, Donna is in the back in the white shirt, and her mom is holding the little girl over here, and she's in white. And we know them very well. They stayed at the house a couple times, and most of these families are ones that I wrote humanitarian parole visas for. Donna's really smart. She was about ready to graduate from high school, and so they crossed a while back. And so she finished high school in California. And when I talked to her last week, she said they were doing fine. She wants to go to college. She's going to start in the spring. She's working at an ice cream shop right now. But look at the size of their extended family. So even though there are two of them, you know, between all of those people, they were able to support Donna and her mom until they really can work and legally. Okay. And they might be able to now, but in their case. This girl, Kayla, is profoundly deaf. And she and her mom, she's 14, she and her mom stayed at La Casa. And I thought she was in great danger living in a tent in El Chaparral, being deaf. Can you imagine a beautiful teenage girl walking around and you can't get the auditory cues that a hearing person would have? So they granted her humanitarian parole visa, plus she possibly would still qualify for a cochlear implant if it's almost past the age where she could get one. But anyway, it was so cool with this little boy and his two sisters, because they would often be at the house at the same time when Kayla and her mom would be there. And the kids had never heard of anyone or seen in person somebody who couldn't hear before. And so one of this little boy's sisters, you can turn to the next slide, asked Kayla's mom, she can't hear in English or in Spanish? It was just perfect. And so the little boy, the reason they had such a great relationship is that he had no fear of just making up hand signals to communicate with her, and they would laugh so much, and they totally communicate. It was great. Kayla was also an amazing artist, and she won a statewide, countrywide award in Honduras for her art. And so she would come to the house, and she would it's like people that have to be doing a particular thing like that. She would just grab a piece of paper and these ratty crayons that we would have for little kids, and she'd start doing a drawing. And so these are the kids all enamored with that. Well, I got an artist friend here who knows a lot of other artists, and they raised a bunch of money, and they sent down a portfolio with a big art book of techniques and a lot of professional art materials for her. And we invited her over the house as just a surprise, and she opened all this stuff. It was beautiful to watch her just investigate it. She went back to her tent that night, and this is her doing that drawing in her tent. Okay, so they're in California. They're doing okay. Her mom has some problems that I think are challenging, and so I worry about them a little bit, but Kayla's with her aunt, so things are okay. This couple, that's Jessica and Jean, her husband, they're from Cuba, from Havana, and they worked in IT, and it got to be really scary for them because they were being asked to divulge information on clients that they didn't want to divulge to the government. But they were smart and saved money and made a plan, and they left. So they're in a little bit different situation than other asylees. When they got to Tijuana, when they finally were going to cross, Jessica and Jean came to us and sat on our little futon couch like a week before they were going to cross, and had great news to tell us. She was pregnant, their first child. And they didn't have any family, so we were like family to them, so they wanted to tell us. And so we had some great baby quilts that someone had made for children, and we gave her one. She let her pick out one to take with her. Well, they crossed. They were put in the Hilera, the ice box on the U.S. side. So if you don't know what the Hilera was, they're not being used, at least in Tijuana anymore. But basically, we would put asylees after they crossed in these like cells that were concrete under the street that are kept at 40-some degrees. You would have to relinquish all your clothing except the layer next to your skin. And you're given a space blanket, like runners get after a race. And you would sleep on the floor in the Hilera packed with other women or men. They would separate couples and be given basically rotten food. And there would be a toilet with no privacy in the corner. And there might be, one woman told me she counted 20 or 21 people in her little cubicle. And she said if everyone had tried to lie down to sleep, there wouldn't have been enough room. And so a lot of women just cry the entire time. This one woman said she just cried for 3 days. And you don't know when you're going to get out. And there's no daylight. So, yeah, welcome to America. And so they went into the Hilera, and she showed them the letter from her doctor saying that she was pregnant. They didn't believe her. About 2 days in, she started bleeding. Then she started bleeding more. Finally, they took her to the hospital, and she'd miscarried. So then they released them from the Hilera, but instead of at least letting them go on their way, they dumped them back. It was part of Trump's Return to Mexico program. So they dumped them back in Tijuana to wait for their court date. So they came to the house and sat and cried and told us what had happened. So then they went and they got an apartment because they were still able to make money. They had their computers and stuff. So they got a little apartment in Rosarito, and for the next year, they just were there. They got to help Jessica with just her depression after her miscarriage. They rescued 2 little kittens. So then I wrote a humanitarian parole visa. It was granted, and they were going to cross. Well, she's so excited, but she doesn't know, but are they going to have to leave their kitties? So this is where community is just like awesome. So somebody here knew a guy in San Diego, and Isaac said, you could, turn that one more. Oh, that's them, and they're now in Miami. Okay, so that's Isaac. So none of us had ever met, but Isaac said he will take the cats. So I helped Jessica get all the papers for the cats. Somebody that could cross the border drove the cats across into the United States, met Isaac, he took the cats. We thought it'd be for 4 days. It was 4 months. Because when they were released from detention, so they crossed, they were put in a hotel and waited for their COVID test, thought they would be released and they could pay for their plane flights. But they just said, be down here at 3:30 a.m. for your flight to Miami. So they weren't able to get the cats. So then it was one thing after another. Flooding, heat waves, strikes, COVID, you name it, there was no way to get these cats cross-country by themselves. So they just reunited with their cats. So the next picture, there's Jessica with one of the 2 cats who arrived all the way cross-country safely about a month ago. And then about 2 weeks after that, I might be a little wrong on the weeks, but Jessica told me that, she said, I have good news. She's pregnant. So they have their cats, and now she's pregnant again, and they're in Florida. This family is not it's a sad story. This family stayed with us. The mom is not in the picture. It's the dad, and these are 4 teenagers, and ages 14 to 19. They were going to stay with a relative of theirs in Houston who just said, of course you can come. I will sponsor you. So they got to Houston, and all of a sudden the light dawns for the relative that they're going to be housing and feeding and clothing a family of 5 with 4 teenagers for 6 to 12 months. And they said, you have to leave in 2 weeks. And the mom, who was already very prone to depression, called just teary, like, what are we going to do? And so I found a sponsor that I thought was going to be a good sponsor in Asheville. She said, we'll go anywhere. So it was out of Asheville, North Carolina, college town, thought it would be great for the kids. Well, it turned out this house was way, 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 way out in the country from Asheville. And they had to walk about 1.5 miles just to get to a bus stop. There was no one else around to even talk to. And then COVID hit, and they were so isolated and so prevented from just doing anything that they went back to Mexico. I don't know where they are. And that brings me to the family I want to talk to you about today. And this is a family that could have a happy ending. And they are kind of in the balance right now. And I want to create community enough that we can help this family for 6 to 12 months, and they will be good to go for generations. We met Lucia and Victoria and little Matthias. This is basically about the time we met them. And you are seeing on Lucia's face the face of grief and pain and trauma. I forget where these are, but you can advance. And we met them the day they showed up in El Chaparral. They were living in Michoacan, and she said, she showed us all kinds of photos on her phone and videos of them singing in their minivan. And they had a happy life. She was married to her husband, Luis. They were childhood sweethearts. They were neighbors. They met when they were 3. And she said he was the best man, the best father, the best husband. So she and Victoria and Luis are sitting in their living room of their house one night. Baby Matthias was 6 months old, and all of a sudden, cartel bullets just blast through the walls of their living room, and they kill him in front of Victoria and Lucia. And less than a week later, she couldn't even stay for burial of her husband. They fled. I mean, she had no idea that she was an asylum seeker. They just were trying to get to the United States, where 2 sisters of hers lived in Northern California she hadn't seen for 20 years. So that's, Luis with baby Matthias and, okay, wait a second, and Victoria. So you can tell, like, just what a kind, loving family this is. All right. This is a story that I didn't know if I was going to share, but I will share with you. Lucia told me this. She said, I didn't believe Victoria when she told me this, but she said, I do now. And she said, 4 days before her father was shot, Victoria told Lucia that she had a dream. And in the dream, the angels came and told her that they needed to take her father, that they needed him. And she said, please don't take my father. I need him here with me. I love him. And they said, well, we need him more. And 4 days later, her father is shot and killed. And she told her mom that at the moment they were looking at his body in the living room, Victoria saw this gigantic angel with huge wings just enfolding her father. And she drew this picture. Okay. Baby Matthias was a chunk, and at one point we found a stroller for Lucia so she wouldn't have to be carrying him around everywhere. Okay. But they spent a lot of time at the house. We would invite them over. They had a relative. When she knew, she was so in shock the day that we saw her that she had just arrived, because she expected to just walk across the border, and it's like, what's going on? I can't. And she was still in shock. Victoria was so traumatized she couldn't speak. That little girl could not speak at all. And so we brought them back to the house that day just to rest and cry and talk a little bit. And then we would keep inviting them back. She found a relative outside of Tijuana that said they could come there, so she was there. But they would come back for dinners, and I don't know if you skipped any or not, but this is like so cute. So you can see how much Matthias has grown. So this is like, 2 years later, they're still there. Javier is trying to put his shoe on, and I actually took a series of about 7 pictures. And Matthias, they're just having this little conversation, and it's like Javier's still holding his shoe. Okay. But there they are in our kitchen. So I wrote a humanitarian, when I came back in March and they were still there, she had since had, so about, I don't know how many months after they had been at their relative's house, it was during COVID, she called Javier about 10 o'clock one night just in a panic because men had come to the house looking for her. And now the thing I forgot to tell you about when her husband was shot is that she found out later that the cartel had shot him by mistake. They had meant to shoot her sister's husband. But now they had followed her. They were there, and she didn't know what to do. So she called Javier. And even though it was COVID and the house was closed, how could you say no? So he sent an Uber for them, and they arrived like probably close to midnight and stayed for 2 weeks. He found another place for them outside of Tijuana and told them that she couldn't tell anyone where they were. She couldn't give a soul their address. So she was still at this ratty little place, but it was a place that she could afford. When I arrived back in March, and so I wrote, what had happened since then was that at one point she was in a grocery store and almost got kidnapped and sex trafficked. And the grocery clerk saw what was happening. It's like, oh, can you help me with this? Or, it's kind of like that kind of thing. And Lucia was going to help. And the woman just came out from the store and grabbed her and brought her back in the house. Well, Lucia began to have trouble sleeping and was really getting depressed. And Victoria was scared and didn't want her mother to ever be out of her sight. So there were things that were getting worse. And so I wrote a humanitarian visa parole request for them because of danger. And it was granted. So we asked them to move into La Casa the last month to save some money. So they were there with us, and so the last night before they were going to cross, we had a special movie night. So here are the kids. They look all happy and relaxed. Okay. But if you look at Lucia's face, it's just so full of concern and worry and fear about what the next day is going to bring. And so they crossed. This is the morning that they left. And when she gets to where they're going in California to Windsor, she reunites with her sisters that she really hasn't seen since she was 10 or 12. And that's where they are now, okay? She found this really great bilingual school for Victoria, who was super smart. And when she would come to the house, she would always want me to help her with her English, so I'd have her helping with my pitiful Spanish. And but at one point, Lucia said, "The light is back in Victoria's eyes." But the reality is this is where they've been living for the last 3 months. Her sisters love her dearly, but there are 3 people, and they live in tiny places and don't make enough money to feed and clothe and house their sister and 2 kids for 6 to 12 months. So Lucia is doing something to earn a little bit of money, and this is like one room. It's basically, you wouldn't even call it a studio, where they've been living for 3 months. But when she got it, it was only available for 3 months. So now they have to move out at the end of the month. Okay. So here's Victoria doing one of her, I think I sent her a card, and she's reading the card. And Matthias is practicing his drawing. They had, this is the church that one of the sisters goes to, and Lucia told me that she have so much potential. They just need some help right now, and it'll make all the difference. So I'm trying diligently to raise enough money with friends talking to friends, like if everybody that was interested in this church talked to 2 people and said, hey, I want you to go with me. I want you to, donate $25 a month, $50 a month for 6 months. We could pay half of her rent. And she still owes what Lucia is doing is paying the lawyer fees right now, which every asylee needs, and they're very expensive. So her lawyer actually was charging less than a lot of people, but they charge for each member of the family. So she was paying, I think, $10,500 or $11,000. And you need a lawyer before you go to court, because after all of this time, if you don't have a good lawyer and a good case, you could be sent back. She will likely not be doing that. And she had a really good psych evaluation before she left that the psychologist who did it said it was one of the strongest ones she's ever done. So I don't fear for that at all for her. But Lucia is so responsible that she's like making sure that she's paid already half of the lawyer fees. So she owes $5,500 to the lawyer. And so I'm thinking $1,500 a month for 6 months at least, if not longer, to help her be able to get an apartment that's not like that, one that she really will feel like can be home to her for a while, so she can begin to really unpack emotionally and physically and begin to create a life, like next steps for herself. So that's it. If you have any questions. No? Okay, thank you.
Where are they right now?
They're in Windsor, California.
Where are your daughters? Is that near,
It's near Santa Rosa, which is, an expensive area. But she has family there. And Victoria's in a good school, and that means the world to her, and she's doing really well. When she went to enroll her in school, that principal told Lucia, well, I think we're going to be putting her back in 2nd grade. Well, Victoria was really not a happy camper to hear that. So they tested her, and the principal said, oh, we're just kidding, she's going into 3rd grade. So, okay.
Is there like a website or an address or something that we could post and say, well, we're trying how to connect without.
What Carol's asking, is there like a website, maybe a GoFundMe page or something that we could gather people together?
Yes, well, I'm in the process of doing a GoFundMe. I wasn't really sure how to present this part of it to this group, because I thought maybe there would be a group in this particular church that would go, okay, let's do this. Let's just figure out how to do this, and we're gonna commit to X amount per month towards this. What I did was just set up a savings account under my checking account for Lucia, just like I have one for La Casa de Paso, but it's a separate one for her. And I will do a GoFundMe, but yeah. So you could be a part of that, or you could just say, we're going to commit to, X amount per month and count on it. We're going to make it happen. And the one thing I would suggest is that, I was telling someone this, is that I have a friend in town who I had no idea, and I would start getting checks for La Casa de Paso from people I didn't know, and they would say, from Joyce, regarding Joyce Gudger, or something like that at the bottom. I shouldn't have said her name. And come to find out, she just talked to her friends, and she said, you need to do this. And so they just said, okay, Joyce said we should do this, so we're doing it. And so I figured if every person could think of, 2 or 3 other members of their family or their neighborhood or their book group that would like to commit to $25 or $50 a month for 6 months, if you do the math, it happens so fast. And that's what makes us all kind of wake up and feel happy about being in the world when you can have an idea of something that needs to be done and you can make it happen that quickly. So thank you for anything that you want to do. Yeah.
What's going to happen at the end of the 6 months that's going to make her independent so she doesn't need the money?
She can, well, it's not a finite time period, but soon she will be able to get a work permit.
I see, so that's.
Yes, so that's the thing. It takes a long time to get them, and it varies. So it's not just like from the day you cross to 6 months from now you get a work permit. No, it varies by state, it varies by judge, it varies by everything. So it varies by how long it takes the government to send you one.
Speak to that because I was working with a family and work permit,
Carol, would you come up here and so people who are watching can hear?
just repeat what I said.
Okay, Carol was working with a family that was here.
Yeah, and it took the mother a long time to get a work permit. So
It took the mother quite a while to get a work
I
permit.
know that it doesn't happen, it's like you said, it varies.
Yeah.
So my question is, if this community wants to do this, can we donate through? this-
Well, and there's a question that Sherry's asking is, can our community set up a fund so we don't have to pay GoFundMe fees? That anybody in our community that's interested, we could do a designated fund. We do have a separate bank account that we could make you'd make a check to the center for the Lucia Fund. Just,
And then it would be,
I like that because that means light.
and then instead
Yeah.
of paying,
Yeah, I know.
instead of paying GoFundMe fees, it's tax deductible to the people we're donating.
Right, right. So we can, instead of paying GoFundMe fees, we're paying to a nonprofit and it's going to a nonprofit work, so it would be tax deductible for the people donating as near as we understand. Have to talk to our accountant about that, but I'm pretty sure we could be a central clearinghouse for that. As I said, I don't think my accountant is going to go, but that might be a simple way to do it, and then we just combine all the thing and pass it forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
And-
you.
And do we have a time frame, like how urgent?
It's urgent. She has to move, this is what makes this so tough. She has to move out at the end of the month. The place, that little place that she could afford was available for 3 months. And 3 months is up at the end of the month. And I've just been, telling her I'm trying to do things without promising. But on the other hand, she has to do something as well. So we can only do what we can do, but time is of the essence.
Well, what's occurring to me is I have quite a few friends in Sonoma County that might know of places that would be available. So I will do some checking on my end to see what we
Yeah.
might be able to find as an interim thing at the very
Yeah.
least.
Okay, so 1,500 a month would,
I think she said that she would be able to pay $1,000 a month, and I'm just taking her at her word. But I know I've looked at enough rentals in that area that it's wine country, so it's a tough place for a.
right. I guess what I'm asking is that the goal because that's as much as you think you can raise, or is that the goal because that's what's going to take care of them?
I think it's the goal because that would take care of them. Yeah.
I would suggest, having lived there, I would suggest that that's a minimum. If we could raise $2,000 a month, that would be awesome. If we could do $2,000 a month for 6 months, if we could raise $12,000, that would probably be
Yeah.
a life-changing thing for them.
Because there are utilities and all.
So as a community, our goal is 2,000 a month. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that would be, and she's not going to use money that she doesn't need. She is absolutely not like that at all. And this family will pay it forward in so many ways. You have no idea. She's a very special person. And I have a feeling that maybe you all will get to meet her at some point. I really want to make that happen and the kids. So thank you again.
Thank you, Sharon.
Where do we go from here, though? Where do we go from here? What do we do?
We start with this and then we figure out where the